All right, for the third question in your guided thinking activity, we're going to look more specifically at Thomas Aquinas, the 10th century Italian Catholic slash Christian monk, and his defense of the cosmological argument in terms of how he phrases it in this formulation called the five ways. Now, the first three in particular relate to various facets of the cosmological argument. The last two will be a little bit different, but let's focus on the first three here. And in the third question, the basic point is going to be: do you find one or more of these arguments compelling or not, and explain why? So when it comes to the cosmological argument, again, what we're trying to wrestle with is how would cause and effect come about in the first place. Well, here are some of the nuances. And by the way, Aquinas, I don't want to say ripped these off, but he let's say he was heavily indebted to Aristotle with these observations, because Aristotle, among other Greek philosophers, made similar observations about this basic question of the origin of all things. So first of all is the argument from motion, and that is no object moves itself. You think about the basic law that an object at rest remains at rest unless acted upon by an outside force, and vice versa. If it's in motion, it remains in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. Well, if you, it doesn't take much to stare out into the night sky and observe over time that there's motion going on here. And so the basic question is, well, how did motion come about in the first place? Well, this is where you get the concept of the prime mover, which is another derivative of the idea of the uncaused cause. There's going to have to be something which is itself unmoved, but sets in motion in the material world. And so secondly, the efficient cause question, this kind of comes more classically to the idea of the cosmological argument. No object causes itself. There's nothing in the material world that can be explained as the source of itself. The existence of objects requires an efficient cause. There's going to have to be something that we're going to call an efficient cause. And what we mean by that is a cause that is sufficient to be efficient. And what we mean is it can affect something else to come into existence. And it itself does not require an explanation for its existence. It is, again, necessary. And it can then set in motion things that are contingent. So how do we explain the motion of objects? How do we explain the efficient cause of objects in the first place? And then the whole concept of, this is one of the most classic formulations of the cosmological argument, and that is possibility versus necessity. There is no clear reason why anything exists at all. And the reason we say that is there's no clear mechanism whereby we can figure out how things came about. Now, once things come into existence, now we can start tracking the cause and effect, development of the material world, etc. And that's not a problem. But how did not only do we have the question of how did something come about, but why? What exactly is the mechanism whereby something doesn't exist and then it does? And this formulation, the point of this formulation is to emphasize the need for a necessary cause. And so here we have, with these three formulations, three different variations on a theme of what it means for there to be a necessary cause, an uncaused cause, and these are all various aspects of the cosmological argument. So first of all, ask yourself, do you think there's anything here? Any specific nuance here that you find compelling, or perhaps not, but either way you can write about that. But then we go to the last two. Last two are a little bit different. This one is a little bit more of it's kind of taken from Plato, and this idea that when we look at the material world, we almost kind of naturally find ourselves making comparisons. So again, my family and I have been down in Galveston, and we've been loving the trees and the breeze, and then we're making comparisons with the Texas coast with other coasts that we've experienced, comparing trees in Texas with trees in Colorado, and you almost kind of naturally, without even thinking about it, start making comparative reasoning processes in your mind. So the idea of the gradations argument is no object is perfect in degree, but the greater the degree of attribute, the greater the degree of that which must be source. So in other words, I look at one tree and think, well, that tree is cooler than another tree, or that tree is not as cool as that other tree. Regardless, I'm looking at the world and drawing comparisons. And the idea is, if I am drawing comparisons, it must be I have this innate idea. And of course, this is Plato's argument, that I had this innate idea of that which is perfect being, the perfect goodness of all things. And that idea is in the back of my mind, and it serves as the comparative structure for anything that I experience. And if that idea of ultimate perfection, ultimate goodness exists in my mind, well, what that means is the greater the source of goodness, the greater the product of goodness. And so if we look at the universe and we're starting to come up with ideas of, say, goodness or order or beauty or something like that, well, then by definition, that leads us to this question of, well, what would be the source of all that? Where did I get that idea in the first place? Could it be that idea is itself kind of a leftover byproduct of I'm caught up in the process of cause and effect, and I have inherent to my mind a concept of greatness that comes from that which is the uncaused cause. And then along with that, we have the concept of governance and design, which is a little more straightforward, and we're going to talk about this argument here in a second. And that is, to the extent that we see something in nature that appears to function for a purpose, it appears to be designed for a purpose, that implies that there's something governing that design for a purpose. You and I as human beings do it all the time. Again, we're going to talk about this one here in the next screencast. So this is moving more into what we call the teleological argument, or that is the argument from a parent, and that's going to be a key term there, a parent design. But we have three variations on a theme of the cosmological argument, and now we have two other arguments that are starting to bleed into the teleological argument, and that is the argument from design. Do you see any one of these arguments that you think is particularly compelling? Maybe one that you find not particularly compelling? Write down your thoughts about this, and then we'll go to the next screencast.